president pointed out today that the July call, with the Ukrainian president was their second phone conversation. And as we reported earlier, the New York Times is out with new details about the first time the two leaders spoke. That was back on April 21st. Quote, 4 days after this first call, Mr. Trump said on Sean Hannity's Fox News program that he would imagine that Attorney General William Barr would like to review information about Ukraine's actions in the 2016 election. Here is part of that April 25th conversation on Fox.
I just spoke to the new president a little while ago, 2 days ago, and congratulated him on a incredible race, incredible run, a big surprise victory.
Mr. President, Ukraine is offering this evidence to the United States. Would you like the United States, all this talk about collusion, they're saying they colluded on behalf of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. Does America need to see that information, especially in light of all the attacks against you on collusion?
Well, I think we do. And frankly, we have a great new attorney general who's done an unbelievable job in a very short period of time. And he's very smart and he's very tough. And I would certainly defer to him, but I would imagine he'd want to see this.
With me for more, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, and Sam Stein, politics editor for the Daily Beast. Frank, let me start with you. So what we just played was from back in April, and you hear right there the president invoking the name of the Attorney General William Barr. And then as this reconstructed conversation came out this morning, you saw the name of William Barr being mentioned in there repeatedly as well. What do you make of the role that Barr has assumed in all of this?
Well, first, it's a huge gap in our knowledge. We need to know exactly and hear precisely from the Attorney General himself what, if any, instructions, guidance, requests, solicitations came from the White House to him to open a case on Biden or to pressure Ukraine to start looking at Biden. We need to understand that because that would be outside the realm of the Attorney General's responsibilities. We pay the Attorney General's salary. We pay that salary so that he can represent us and fight for justice, not that he can represent the personal interest and re-election campaign of the president and fight for him. So we need to hear from him. Likely, he will need to be testifying as a witness in any impeachment proceedings. And I strongly believe at this point that he needs to recuse himself from any decision related to the DNI whistleblower case. It may be too late. We've heard that DOJ initially told the acting DNI, you don't need to send this complaint to Congress. If the AG weighed in on that, that's a big mistake.
Sam, in addition to the requests here for the investigation into the Bidens from the president, there's also this reference to 2016, to his suspicions, right, I should say, about Ukraine there. Talk a little bit about how central Ukraine has become to the president's thinking. And there's reporting out there that suggests Rudy Giuliani has a lot to do with this. Right.
There's a couple things going on here. One is there's a suspicion inside the White House that that officials in Ukraine were involved in an effort to essentially smear Paul Manafort during the 2016 election, and that itself helped put Trump in this world of trouble that ultimately resulted in the special counsel probe. And so inside Trump world, this is, treated as gospel, essentially. And more or less, they want to find out what happened there, and they want to do it as an effort to essentially prove that this entire episode, that the special counsel probe was, in fact, a witch hunt. And so it's made the entire operation paranoid. They're obsessed by it. But it's also fed a bunch of conservative journalism as well. A name that continuously pops up here in our reporting is John Solomon, a very well-known conservative investigative reporter who has written recently for The Hill. So that's one thing that's going on here. And then the second thing is, and this was what we were trying to figure out today because it was mentioned in this document that was released, this memorandum, is whether or not Donald Trump feels that the missing 30,000 or so emails on Hillary Clinton's server are somehow in Ukraine, whether he can actually obtain them by going to officials in Ukraine and asking for their help in getting them. And I'm not totally sure if he has a proper understanding of what's happening here, if he actually thinks they are literally there. But this seems to be animating his conversations with the Ukrainian president as well.
Frank, we mentioned the Director of National Intelligence, Joe Maguire, will be testifying in front of Congress tomorrow. what questions do you think are most important for him to be asked?
The questions write themselves. So first, why did you choose to not comply with the clear mandate that you turn over this urgent and credible whistleblower complaint to Congress? Number two, who did you consult about that? Name names at the Department of Justice that you consulted with when they initially told you you didn't have to turn it over. Do you have any evidence that the Attorney General weighed in on this? Who at the White House spoke with you, if anyone? Do you have any evidence that President Trump himself was briefed and or weighed in on this decision? And then moving forward, what level of investigative effort did you take to look into this through the Inspector General? Did you have discussions with the Inspector General? And then I want to know even more. Are you aware of any further intelligence information that tends to corroborate this allegation? What else is out there throughout the intelligence community? Did you do a thorough enough job to truly investigate this allegation?
Sam, just a question about this reconstructed conversation transcript that came out today. It sounds like, it certainly seems it's intensified calls from Democrats to move towards impeachment. There are some Republicans who are sticking by the president on this, saying there's nothing to this. There are plenty, though, you're hearing from who are expressing some measure of concern over this. When you look at that reaction, it does raise the question why the White House did this. Was this an instance of their hand being forced by these sudden calls for impeachment?
Well, our White House team has gotten two distinct reads on this. The first is, and this came yesterday, was a fairly logical calculation, and maybe even a strategically wise one, that eventually this was going to come out, that there was essentially no way to hold it back. You could have dragged it on, but, you know, that would have put a cloud of suspicion over the administration, too. So get it out, rip the Band-Aid off, and move on. But there were also people inside the president's team who felt like it wasn't that bad, that what they saw there did not contain a explicit quid pro quo, that press reports had said 8 instances of the president Trump pressuring the Ukraine president on Biden, and in fact there were not 8, and that people would basically move on from this because they would determine it was the equivalent of a political nothing burger. And that is proving to be a sort of ridiculous calculation. Yes, in the conservative media echo chamber, there is this line that there's nothing there. But no one outside of that seems to regard it as anything short of a complete bombshell. And if they thought that this wasn't going to hurt the president, it seems pretty clear as of now that this was a grievous miscalculation.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.